Nice. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the second part of this afternoon's tutorials. In the first part, just earlier on, and you'll see that online if you're watching it at a later time, we covered some masking techniques and we covered some preparation techniques, so cleaning of your models and that kind of thing before you build them. I've spent the time just now just getting a few things set up here with the spray booth. So you might hear a little bit of extra noise. I'm going to try and make sure I'm speaking over it. So I've got two noisy things happening here. I've got my trusty spray booth that I'm working on. And I've also got a compressor here, an air compressor. So they're both going at the moment, so they might make a little bit of noise. Now, as I mentioned before, it's always very important to be safe when you're using a lot of these products. I'm going to be doing some spraying, hence the spray booth that I'm using at the moment to take away any vapor and that kind of thing that would be dangerous for me to breathe in. I'm also wearing gloves, and you can see I've already been doing some painting and I've got a little bit of yellow on my hands already. Earlier on, I did a little bit of masking of propeller, and as you can see there, I've started spraying the yellow tips on that propeller there. And that's what I was doing just in the break time. So there's a couple of techniques that I want to show now. One of which is a thing called pre-shading. Now I'll get BJ to cut down to my aeroplane that I'm working on. It's a 72nd scale Spitfire from Tamiya. It's this model here. And with the models, particularly military models, so tanks, planes, that kind of thing, what you often find is that they have lots of panel lines on them. And those panel lines obviously sustain wear and tear over time. And when you're doing modeling, one of the techniques that you can use is pre-shading. That what that does is it increases the visibility of those panel lines to make them stand out, make them look a little bit more battle worn, make them look like they've been through a little bit. So I've already done some there, you can see on the bottom side of that wing, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. This is the raw plastic on the other side there that I haven't done. And it looks really messy at the moment, but it's going to change in time, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment. So I've got some Vallejo Air just in black, just a very simple water-based paint. And I'm going to just put that straight into my airbrush there. Mix that up a little bit there. Straight into a pot. Give that a good spray. Make sure it's the right consistency. Now, I will get a little piece of paper here and just show you that with the airbrush, this is probably covered in another live tutorial that we did on airbrushing. I'm not going to belabor the point now because it's not what we're here for today, but you can get very wide sprays with the airbrush, you can see there, when you're painting large things. And if you go closer and don't pull the airbrush trigger back quite so much, you can actually get very thin lines, like you can see there. Now, I'll just hold that up to the camera. You can get actually quite thin detail there when you go up very close. Now, it doesn't matter if this is pretty rushed and pretty messy, but what we want to do is go up really close and we want to pick out all of those little panel lines and we want to spray over them. Now, as you can see, I'm not just getting this in the panel lines, I'm getting a lot of overspray as well. Doesn't matter. Another technique that you can use with the airbrush if you're wanting to get right into those panel lines is actually taking that guard off. Now, what you don't want to do is drop your airbrush and damage your needle. And what you want to do is get those really fine lines. I've probably gone a little bit too wet with my paint, to be honest. Now, if I was at home, I'd probably play with this a little while until I got the right consistency. In this case, I don't really have that luxury because we're live. So we're just going to go straight onto the plane itself. And what I want to do is pick out, are we in good view there, BJ? Is that close enough? Maybe do a bit of a close-up if we can, yeah. And do is pull that trigger back just very slightly. There we go. That's probably a little bit too much. There we go. And I want to pick out all of those panel lines. Very slowly go over all of them. And as you can see, it's very messy, it's very rough, and it does not matter. What I want to be doing is picking out all of those panel lines. So this is a method known as pre-shading. So it's like a shading that you do before painting. It looks pretty messy, it's okay. Little circle there, some parts here. Lots of overspray. So the idea with pre-shading is what you're doing is marking out where the shadows are going to be and where the paint wear is going to be on your plane, the panel wear, the natural panel wear that comes with these kinds of things in real life. Now, this kind of thing happens very naturally in real life, obviously, to the objects themselves. But when you're doing modeling, it's a lot smaller scale, and you want to draw people's attention to that wear and tear and the contrast that comes with wear and tear. So with modeling, you're often accentuating those things, making them a little bit clearer and a little bit more obvious when they wouldn't be obvious, quite as obvious in real life. You want to be almost overdoing them a little bit. I'm going to do these bits in here, really accentuate those shadows and things. Just going to keep going there. And it doesn't matter if it's messy because wear and tear can be quite random. One of the things that's quite important to do is actually look at how these things look in real life. Do some research, look up pictures of these actual objects and these actual planes and what they look like when they've been used. It can be very beneficial to actually learn what it is they ought to look like when you're doing a scale model. So, pretty messy, doesn't matter. Just picking out all of those panel lines that you can see, all of those little fine details. Every now and again, I need to just give my airbrush a little bit of a blast just to clear anything out of it, any dried paint that's clogging it up. You can see there, that's pretty messy. Now, it looks messy now, but when I'm just going to catch the edges of those wings, when I do the next layer, then what I've done here is going to be a little clearer. So, looks pretty messy, doesn't it? And the same on that top half, which I did previously. Looks pretty messy. Now, the underside of that wing is going to be a light grey. So let me just clean out my airbrush now very quickly. Just going to put my unused paint back in the bottle because I don't want to waste it. Bear with me for just one moment. Just my little, there they are. Just going to use a pipette here just to suck up that paint, feed it back into the bottle. Very bubbly. I'm just cleaning out my airbrush a little bit. I'm just doing this a little quickly, so my apologies. And then I'll show you the next step of what I'm doing. Now, I'm going to be using, which one is it? Not that one. Ah, there it is. Sorry, I couldn't find it. I'm going to be using the Vallejo Air Russian AF Grey. I know this is not going to be perfectly the correct colour for the Spitfire. So apologies for that. I know there's probably people out there that are completely freaking out that I'm using the wrong colour. I'm sorry, I just don't have time to finesse it too much and make it perfect. It's going to be what it's going to be, I'm afraid. I'm going to use a pipette just to mix that in the pot. And I'm just going to blast that out a little bit there. Get rid of that. Get down to that colour, that light grey. We might need a little bit more there. I'm lightening it up with a little bit of white as well. Just using the pipette to mix that in the pot. Now, very shortly, we're going to see the benefits of the pre-shading that I've done here. Now, you always want to be adding paint in very thin layers. But in the case of pre-shading, we're going to be doing very, very thin layers. And we're going to be building that up very slowly. So I'm just going to very gently spray over that. So what I'm spraying now is the color that it's going to end up being eventually, overall. Now, you see there, I've done my first pass, and it's probably, the paint's a little bit thick, so I'm just going to thin it down just a tiny little bit. What you see there is that those messy lines that I did before are going to start to disappear. They're going to be there just as very, very basic shadows only. Now, if I lay this paint on too thick, those lines that I've done are going to disappear entirely, and I don't want them to. So I'm just doing this layer very thinly. Like that. And what you find is, see those messy lines that I did earlier on? They're still there, but they're very faint. Sean has a question. Yes, BJ. They are a little bit of both, mostly negative detail. So the paint that I've sprayed on there is going to go into those negative details, But like the portions you see, I'll just point them out with my hobby knife. Put the parts here, 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 they're actually raised detail. So I've done the pre-shading around them. So the negative detail is going to be the parts in between the wing and the raised piece. So it's going to suit both negative and positive details. So when we talk about negative details and positive details, we talk about the pieces that are sunken in and the pieces that are raised up. So if we imagine this is a profile of the piece that we're dealing with. So if you can imagine a cutaway version, this is the negative recess here. And this is the normal surface of the plane. And obviously this is blown up quite large. So you can imagine this is a panel line, a very thin, small panel line that runs down the various edges of the thing. So this is a negative portion. If we were doing it the other way around, you can imagine this is the surface. That's a positive portion, a raised part of the surface, and this is the regular angle of the wing. So if this is the negative surface here, what you're doing is you're painting dark in here. And if it's a raised portion, and this is the surface of your model, then this part in here is the part that's negative that you're going to be spraying in darker, that's maintaining that detail. So I hope that answers the question adequately. So I'm going to keep going here with this really fine layer here. So what you find is when you spray that like that, what you find is you get that sort of shadowy detail still remains. So we've got the colour that the underside of that wing is going to be, but the shadow that I've done of the pre-shading is still remaining behind. It's quite subtle though. It's not, you know, there absolutely brutally. It's just very subtle. So you can still see it. And when you looked at that piece before, just in raw plastic form, you could not see those lines quite the same. But because I've done the pre-shading and I've got little bits of paint that are still settled in there, that the paint that I'm spraying on now, the overall color, is not quite hitting. It's mostly hitting, but not quite. So what you get is that subtle panel lining will still remain. You can catch all of that detail still there now.
Subtle.
It's just subtle. It's
Subtle.
It's not in your face. It's just there. So when when you look at that, when I've done it before, it's really ugly. It looks really horrible. But when you've painted it, you just get that really subtle wear and tear of those panels is still left behind. Okay, so that's pre-shading. I'm going to use another technique here, another painting technique, and that is, I'll show you on a bit of paper here. So these are these rocks that I had earlier, and that's quite a dark rock. And when you've got a surface, it's going to look a little bit like that. And when you can imagine this is the dark rock here. There's my my colleague over there is using some noisy equipment. So this is the dark rock that you have here. What I'm going to be doing is spraying in this direction here, like that. And what that does is that it hits some of the edges. It'll hit that edge there in a lighter color, but leave this edge here still dark and in shadow. So what that does is it accentuates all of the detail in that. So if you have a look here, we've got a really rough rock. And when you just look at it like that on camera, it's actually quite dark. yeah? But when I hit it in this direction here with my lighter color, is all of a sudden, I'm hitting it in one direction as the light would hit it. And what happens is you start seeing a lot of detail. You get, yep, you get one face that's quite light, another face that's quite dark. And what, yeah, there we go. There we are. This is right in the center there. So all of a sudden, a dark rock starts taking on a lot of life, because what we're doing is we're using the paint to accentuate where the light would actually hit a natural object. Can you see there how the detail is completely changing in that rock? You see there? So you've got an object now that starts looking like it's got a lot more detail in it. And if you look at it that way, it's almost like the sun has hit there, or the light has hit there, but it's left there. So let's do this a little bit more from this angle here. I'm just doing it from the one direction, and what you end up getting is all of the natural detail that's in that object starts coming out. You see that? Okay, so that's just a couple of really basic things that you can do: pre-shading and directional lighting using nothing but paint. But what it does is you start seeing details that you didn't see before. BJ, I've got the little cromlech pumpkin that's over there just on the shelf where you got the 9 steps thing from. Yep. So this was one, a little object that I did in a last demonstration that I did. And again, it was just a little cromlech pumpkin there, and it's just monochrome. Now, if you look at it from that direction there, straight up and down, it looks quite dark. And when you look at it from that direction, it looks quite light. When you look at it from that middle direction, what you see is shadow and light. And what that does is it brings out all of that detail there. So what I've done is I've used the airbrush and the light in such a way that it accentuates different details there. So that's a couple of painting techniques that I've been able to use with the airbrush that have accentuated details and made it look like it's in light and shade. So detail there, and our pre-shading, and you can see there all of those panels have just come up really nicely. A couple of techniques there that I've used, and again, we're getting up to the top of the hour, so we're going to take a little bit of a break, and we're going to come back with a few more techniques such as washes and dry brushes. That'll be in our next session, which will start in about 5 or 10 minutes from now. No worries. Thanks all for coming.